In this module, we're going to take a look at how to create dynamic websites, in general what they are, but more specifically how to build them using PHP. So far, what we've built are static websites. That means we built websites where each web page was built by an author, typically you, and the web page only contained the content that we put on that page. Now, in contrast to static web pages, we also have the notion of dynamic web pages, and more specifically dynamic websites, where all the pages, or the majority of the pages, are dynamically generated. What happens with a dynamic page is that the information on the page is not pre-recorded, it's not pre-coded, but instead the information is generally extracted from a database, and then the actual page that the browser displays is dynamically generated, meaning that there's really no page stored on the server, but instead a program runs that generates the page right before it's being sent back to the browser. So the browser doesn't know the difference between a dynamically generated page and a statically generated page. It just sees HTML. But the difference is that in one case, for the static, the page is pre-coded and pre-stored. In the case of a dynamic page, we write a program that then generates pages on demand. Let me give you an example. Suppose I wanted to build a website that lists the different players that play in the Bruins. Now, if I did this as a static website, I would, build a website, maybe have a picture, maybe have the name of the player, maybe have, in parentheses, the position they play. Could have lots of other information too, their hometown, the height, the weight, the age, the salary, whatever it is, whatever's sort of important for us. But think about if we needed to keep this page up to date. As players are added to the roster, players are being removed from the roster, they're traded, maybe they're sent down to Providence, maybe some of them choose to retire, maybe some of them get injured, maybe they're long-term injured reserve. So in that case, basically the list of players changes continually. That would mean that you would need a web developer to go into the page and continually keep the page up to date. That's time-consuming, it's error-prone, and of course it's expensive. The better approach would be to put the information about the players into a database and then write code to extract the information from the database and build a page programmatically. So don't pre-store the page, but rather store the information in the database and then build the page with the information from the database. Which then would mean if you want to modify the page, all you really have to do is add the additional data to the database. And in fact, you could even allow users to provide new information through forms on your web page, which are then added to the database, and the next time they look at the roster, the new information appears. In fact, that's how every modern website works. All of the posts on Facebook are in a database. Every time you look at a page, the page gets generated by reading all the posts and the replies from the database. So here's the overall process of how this happens. So the first thing, of course, happens is an author, a programmer, has to write dynamic HTML, meaning HTML mixed with scripting language. Then when the client, the user on the browser, requests the web page, the web server then locates that file and passes that file that contains the program to the scripting engine, typically PHP. The web server then processes the instructions of the scripting engine, creates an HTML file, and then streams the HTML file back to the browser. And the browser simply processes the HTML like it is any other page and displays it. So again, the browser doesn't know the difference. The difference is that the page was never really stored on the server. It was actually a program that generated the page. Now there are several server-side scripting engines that we can use that use different programming languages and have different pros and cons. The most common one is PHP, and it typically accesses data that's stored in a relational database, which is most commonly MySQL. But you can also use Ruby on Rails, you can use ASP.NET, you have a lot of other choices for scripting languages, although PHP really has emerged as somewhat of a standard. This is what we often call websites that are built with MySQL and PHP, LAMP or WAMP technology stacks that typically use Linux as the operating system on which the web server runs. They use Apache as the web server, they use MySQL as the database, and then PHP as the dynamic programming language. So that's what's often referred to as an LAMP or LAMP stack. That's sort of a combination of technologies that we use to build websites. Now, we don't have to really worry about this as much. Our stack's a little bit simplified. We don't really worry about the operating system because we're going to use a hosted server. You know, we've used Weebly for some of the assignments. We're also going to use a workspace. We're going to use we are going to have to use a workspace again this time because Weebly does not support PHP. So there's no dynamic page generation on Weebly. However, a workspace, on the other hand, supports MySQL and PHP quite nicely. So we're going to use a workspace as our web server, a workspace as our sort of technology infrastructure and an operating system. We'll use MySQL as a database, and we'll use PHP as a dynamic page scripting language. So what's going to happen ultimately is that we're going to have a situation where a user on the browser can request a page that's automatically generated by our web server built, our website built on a workspace. And the PHP program is going to be a combination of HTML defining the layout of the page and PHP scripting code that's going to produce certain parts of the page by reading data from a database. So it's basically dynamically generated content. So this requires, of course, a database of some sort. Now, like I said, we are going to use MySQL. MySQL is an example of a relational database. Now, a relational database is characterized by being a collection of tables, and each table contains records of a particular type, and each record has fields. That's information about it. So, for example, if we were to build a website about Bruins players, we would have a players table, which would then contain one row or one entry for each player. And each column in that table would be some information about the player. The name, height, hometown, salary, position, number, and so on. So it's actually pretty simple to create dynamic web pages. You first start by creating a database. You then define the tables in the database and what information that you want to store about each table. You add the data to the database, either manually or you build a form that collects the data and then stores it. You write your PHP program to build the HTML page with data from the database, and you integrate the PHP program into your website. So here's actually a full PHP program that produces a dynamically generated list of Bruins players. Now there's a lot going on here, and we're not going to go ahead and take a look through everything right now. I'm going to break this up into sort of different sections. So the first section is the connection to the database. So that requires that you set up information about how to connect to the database. So the first part is, notice that, let me just get a marker here. Notice that we have to start the PHP with that and then close it later on. Again, you can't see it. It's actually open here. If you take a look at this. Actually, you know what? Let me mark it for you with a highlight. It's open here and it's closed here. So that, you know, everything in between the two from here to there would be PHP. And notice that the PHP program is essentially a collection of PHP commands, you know, like this one right here. and HTML, like this stuff right here. So it's sort of a combination of PHP spitting out, if you will, HTML. But anyway, getting back to the first part here. So the first part is connecting to the database. This is how you make the connection to the database. This part right here actually makes the connection. You do that by calling a function. The function in this particular case is called MySQL I connect. Doesn't matter what the name of the function is, you just have to learn it. It's MySQL I _ connect. But it requires information, parameters they're called. You got to tell it what the URL of the server is that holds the database. You got to tell it the username and the password that's used to log on to the database because you want to keep your data secure. You can actually have more than one database on a server, so you have to tell it the database name. And you have to tell it the port number on which to communicate with the database in case you have multiple databases running. And those are the variables that we set up here. So server name is passed right here. Username is passed right here, and so on. So these are the variables that you have to set up right here. URL to the server, username, password, database name, port number. Now, where to get this from? Well, this is all done as part of the setup of the MySQL database on a workspace. There are videos, very detailed videos to take you through exactly that process on how to do a setup for a MySQL database on MySQL. In fact, it's going to take you through the entire programming of a very simple PHP program on a workspace. So I'm explaining it here in general. There are some additional videos on the website that show you in detail how to do that for a workspace. So make sure that perhaps even stop the video right now and go to the other videos. Or once you're done with this video, make sure you watch the other ones very carefully and follow along. Actually run a workspace at the same time and try to reproduce the steps as I go through them. Very important that you try it out, that you do it, that you actually perform the steps, because that's how you learn. Anyway, so now we have a connection. Now we're going to have to make sure that the connection was successful. We do that by checking for an error. And if we do have an error, we call a function called die. Die means exit the program. Don't go on. We got a problem. And this part says, and print out this piece of text plus, that's actually a plus, the error message, so that you know what exactly went wrong. Shouldn't happen. Normally it doesn't happen. If all of your variables here are correct, you won't get an error. You'll only get an error if you perhaps have the wrong username, the wrong password, the wrong database name, the wrong server name, or if perhaps the server is down. Let's say a workspace is down. You can't connect to it. Then you would also get an error. But assuming you've connected correctly and everything was successful, the next step will be to retrieve data from the database. So this requires that you send to the database a SQL command. Now this means that you send to the database a command that specifies which data you would like to retrieve. And we do that right here. This part right here specifies the data that we wish to retrieve. And it's written in a programming language called SQL, the structured query language. This is SQL right here. Now we could spend weeks teaching you SQL. Not important for us right now. If you want to know more about SQL, take a database course. The number of online courses you can take. Just take a course that shows you how to build databases, how to do SQL. For us, what's important is that this is relatively straightforward. You use the word select, followed by star. Star means give me everything, from, and then the name of one of your tables. How do you know the name of your table? Well, this is the name of the table you created in the MySQL database. If you can't remember, go back to a workspace, launch the PHP Admin 3 tool. It'll give you a list of all your databases and the list of all of your tables within a database. Again, there are separate videos that I've recorded that show you exactly how to do that within a workspace. So once you've set up your SQL query, you then take that and you pass it to the function called con query. Con is the connection you set up before. So check this out. Oops. So this is your con right here. That's the one that you use to connect right here. And then you call the function query on that. That will now go to the database, execute that query, get back all of the players, and it's going to put a list of all the players to that variable called result. Then I'm going to use the variable result to go and process or build the output. So this is going to get very interesting. I'm first going to check to make sure that I actually got something back. Assuming that I do, I'm then going to go ahead and build my HTML. I want to put the result into a table. So I have to actually output to the output stream that goes back to the browser the HTML I want to send it. That is done in MySQL with a function called echo. Echo says, echo this back, say it back to the output stream. So this sends to the output stream HTML. Then it's going to send to the output stream for each row. This part here basically says for each row send to the output stream a table row command, td image source equal. Now that's when I want to output the image for the player. And then, this is very important right here, this dot says, and then connect to that the contents of the variable pimage, which is one of your fields that you set up in the database. You gave one of your fields in the players table the name pimage. It's going to grab that image content and it's going to connect it with the image source equal command, and then it's going to connect it with the remainder. So I'm basically outputting an image tag where the URL to the image comes from the database. I'm going to output another column, change the style, and I'm going to output of that column the player's name plus a parenthesis plus the player's position plus a parenthesis and a table data close, and then the table row close. So what I'm doing essentially here is I am sending to the output stream standard HTML, but the HTML is modified with content from the database. So I'm basically adding to my HTML tags different content from the database. So this comes from the database right here. This comes from the database right here. This comes from the database right here. And I'm mixing with my HTML. This is a little bit hard to understand when you look at the code here, but once you look at the output from the browser, that's exactly what it looks like. It basically put out table border right here, put out table row right here, put out td image source equal right here. But then notice after the slash here, this is the item that comes from pimage. And then this part right here is right here. And then output of the v-align top is right here. And then Tukarask comes from here. Goalie comes from position. The parenthesis is what I output, and then the closing tags right here. And that was one iteration through that loop. This part right here. Then the while keeps going for the next record in the database. So we're going to do it again for the next record. For the second player that I retrieved from the database. And then for the third player. And if there had been more, this would have continued. If I had 30 players in the database, it would have run this loop right here 30 times. It keeps going until it doesn't have any more results in the result that was returned. That is how you build a dynamic page. Now I know that there's a lot to learn about the syntax. This is not that important. I'm not going to go turn you here into PHP programmers. That could be a semester course all by itself. What I need you to understand is how dynamic pages work. And the way this works is that we start out by defining the database. Right here. define the database in a workspace. We create the tables. And then we add data using the workspace input mechanism to add data to the database. Like I said, we could have also done it programmatically. We could have loaded Excel files. We could have written forms to input the data. We'll learn more about forms later on. Then we write the script, and then we retrieve the data and generate the dynamic page via the script. Now, how do you ultimately embed this into your sites, into your websites? It's not that hard. You can just use custom HTML like we've done before in Weebly and just embed it as an iframe. All you have to do is embed this code into your Weebly page wherever you want it to appear. It's just custom HTML. And the key part right here is this part right here. This is the URL to the PHP you built in a workspace. That's that file you built, and that's the domain name you had. Might be a little bit different for you. Yours is probably going to be something like IS1500 dash, your username .@webpages.com. I happen to register my own URL, my own top-level domain name. You didn't. You're going to use a subdomain name. But no matter what, it's the same thing. You have the URL to the file on that server, and that you embed in the iframe. And then whenever the page gets displayed, you're going to see the result. You're going to basically see the output of the PHP put right directly on the Weebly page. And that allows you to build dynamic content within Weebly. So very important that you go to the lecture for this topic, and that you look also at the 3 workspace tutorials that are put together. How to create the database, how to get data in, how to build a PHP, and then of course how to embed it inside Weebly.